Greetings viewers, as you can see here in front of you, and if you click the video title, I have a MCX Virtus pistol here that I am going to disassemble for cleaning. So I thought I'd take you along for the journey here just so I can show you how it's done. So I am going to break this video up into a couple parts. You can check the timestamp down below if there's anything in specific that you're looking for. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to disassemble this weapon for just general maintenance and cleaning. So basically just field stripping it down, pulling the bolt out so you can access all the parts you need to for a normal cleaning. Then we're going to disassemble it and actually remove the entire barrel assembly. So that would be something useful for you if you're doing something like a caliber change, or maybe annually you like to do a deep cleaning of all your guns. That'll definitely give you an opportunity to be able to do that. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So much like any other AR, we have these two pins here that need to be knocked out. They are captive. We just push from the opposite side here. They pull out and they will stop. Same thing back here. So you just got to give it a nice push from the other side, then get up underneath the little flange top here and pull it up. And that'll allow you to separate the weapon into two pieces. So you have your lower receiver and your upper receiver. Now, unlike normal ARs, like I mentioned, when you take out this first pin, that actually allows access to remove this handguard here. So this whole thing will slide forward. So if you grab the rear of the upper receiver and you grab a portion of the forend here, depending on what accessories you have, your hands may fit in different various positions to be able to grab this thing. But at the top you can see this section of the rail from here forward is part of the forend, and this part here is actually one piece part of the upper receiver assembly. So to pull it apart, there are little tracks here basically that this slides into. Be careful, try not to bash it around too much. That will slide off and give you access to your piston assembly and your barrel. So your forend will be a separate piece you can set aside. You may need to clean it. I'm not sure how well you can tell, but I have a little bit of a nasty spatter there from the piston spitting some gunk out when last time I shot this thing, so that's going to need to be cleaned up. So that's why I removed this. So your lower receiver, again, just like any AR, takes standard triggers, safety selectors. You can access all the parts that you need to in here. So I'm going to go ahead and set this aside, and we're going to look at our upper receiver. Same thing, any other standard AR. This has a replacement Radian Raptor charging handle, but we're just going to pull that out, and it's going to take the bolt out with it. So we'll go ahead and take the bolt out. It should have these two springs on the top. When you're removing the charging handle, once you get it to a specific position, you can look in here, it's kind of notched and indented a little bit. So we'll get the charging handle down. It has to actually drop down and come out. There are little notches here that will line up with indents inside of the upper receiver that will allow it to slide in and out of, so you can remove it from the weapon. So as for basic disassembly for cleaning, this is about all you need to do for the upper receiver. You'll have access to the chamber here and all of the upper receiver, the end of the barrel, and our piston. So we're gonna set this aside with our lower receiver. So all we're left with here is the bolt. Now, if you would like to disassemble this to clean it a little bit better, so I'm gonna go into disassembling this bolt here. This is where it gets slightly different from the AR. The bolt itself and this portion here are similar, but then all of this is quite different. All right, so once we've got our bolt removed here, what I usually use when I'm disassembling, I just have a regular Glock punch tool. Just any small little punch will work. On the left-hand side of the bolt, as it's facing forward in the weapon, you'll see that there's the head of a pin here, and on the back side it's the bottom of that pin. So we want it at the bottom of the pin, and we're going to push out, and that's going to allow this to come out. So that pin is captured here, so that's going to stay where it is. We can then go ahead and get our firing pin out. We need to get something behind it to actually pull it. It does have a little spring that comes with it here. Make sure that doesn't pop off and get lost, so we'll set that aside. Next, we've got this little pin right here that is sideways. In order to remove it, we have to rotate it, again, much like an AR. And we can pull it out. You'll just have to kind of flex this out of the way to get it. That will allow our bolt to come out. So as for this assembly that's left, if you would like to remove this portion of the top with the recoil springs, with the piston portion facing forward on the left-hand side, there is, just like that other pin, there is a piece here. We just need to push that out. It's going to pop out, so make sure you hold on to that and do not lose it. This piece is going to come out, and this is going to slide off of the side. So it's going to come out. That piece that just fell out is what's kind of holding this in place, and then this is actually going to slide out from the side. So you can see here that there's a little wall there that's going to keep it going here, so it can only go in and out one direction. It's pretty simple to figure out. Again, we've got our captured pin here. There is a roll pin in place there that's keeping that from getting lost, thankfully. So here we have all of the pieces of the bolt that we've disassembled here. We can take the extractor out still if you'd like to go one more step further, just like any other AR bolt. This is the extractor. We've got this pin that runs through here, just like the other parts. Just push it from one side to the other. As you can see, my punch went all the way through, so we have our pin. Make sure not to lose that. I'll usually put my finger on top of this when I pull my punch back out, just to make sure nothing goes flinging, because there is a small spring in here, and this is not something you want to lose and be crawling around on the floor looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and get all these pieces cleaned up, and then we'll move on to the next step in the video. All right, so we've got the bolt and parts that go there cleaned up. We're going to move on to the next step. This is beyond just simple breakdown for cleaning and maintenance on your weapons. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to disassemble the bolt. So the first thing we're going to do, you'll notice that this has two settings. It just rotates from one side to the other, but right here there is a little spring-loaded plunger. So right here, there's a little spring-loaded plunger, and what we're going to do is we're going to press that all the way in, and I'm going to rotate this entire thing 180 degrees, and I'll show you why. I'll do my best to keep it in frame here so you can see. So I'm just going to kind of get my nail on the plunger, and I'm going to spin this all the way over. And you can see here, this whole section here has rotated out, and what that'll allow me to do is pull this bolt forward. I'm just going to have to kind of wiggle it a little bit. So you can see there's little grooves in here, and what that's going to do is that's going to catch on these little pieces of this lip here. But you can see the piston's pretty dirty, or this portion of the piston is pretty dirty here, and then from here this is going to just slide right out towards the front. So this is the actual piston. So basically, after the round detonates and the round travels here, the gas comes up, and instead of the gas itself traveling back and propelling the bolt backwards, it kind of just gets contained in this little section here. This moves backwards, and this is what contacts this portion of your bolt here and forces it to go back so that it can cycle the next round. So good idea to go ahead and keep this clean as well. So we'll set this aside for now, and I'll move on to the next step, which is going to be removing the actual barrel itself. So this is typically only recommended if you're going to be doing some sort of barrel swap, or again, you're doing some sort of major maintenance and you want to do a super deep clean of this weapon. So what you're going to need in order to be able to do that is you're going to need a T27 Torx, that's what size these two bolts are here. These are numbered 1 and 2. So I've got my T27 tip here on my screwdriver, and we're going to loosen them. We're going to start with 1. We're going to break it loose. We're going to go to 2. We're going to break that loose. And then we're just going to go ahead and loosen them up to the point where we can actually slide this barrel off. All right, so if we look at the bottom here, this is kind of spring-loaded. So this actually clamps around the base of the barrel here. So you want to make sure that when you undo it, that it leaves enough space that your barrel actually has room to clear. So you can see here, this is squishy, so we want to make sure that pops open with enough room to allow the barrel to leave the receiver, and the barrel should just slide right out. And how easy is that to go ahead and clean your chamber rather than having it inside the upper receiver? So again, this is if you want to change barrel lengths, if you're going to a shorter barrel or a longer barrel, you're switching to something like 300 Blackout. This is about as far as I would recommend taking your firearm apart, so I'm going to go ahead and get all this stuff cleaned up, and then I'm going to show you guys how to reassemble all of these things that we've taken apart. All right, so I've got all my parts cleaned up. We are now going to work on the reassembly stage from this point of the weapon. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to put the barrel back into the upper receiver. So our clamps are still wide open. We've got all this cleaned up. You want to make sure, obviously, that the piston portion is towards the top of the upper receiver, and all you have to do is just slide it into place. There are several guiding pins, or there are guiding pins on each side that it's kind of hard to screw it up. They have their own little slot that they're going to go into. It only goes in one way. Kind of wiggle it back in there. Make sure that it's butted all the way up against the upper receiver here so that these clamps can close around it, and then we're going to proceed to screw these down. They are numbered on here, number 1 and number 2, so we are going to get number 1 down first. And we're going to move on to number 2. And then we go back to 1. Make sure you refer to your owner's manual on the inch-pounds of torque that these are suggested from Sig to be tightened down to, and make sure you get those numbers. So then now once the barrel is reattached and you've got those 2 bolts tightened down, we're going to reassemble the piston. So we've got our 2 pieces again here. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take the piston and we are going to insert it right back where it came from. You can grab the skinny end that sticks out here and just pull it back until it doesn't go in any farther. And then we can move on to this piece. All right, so basically we have to reassemble this the opposite of the way that we took it out. As you look at it, we have these raised portions here. Those need to be facing upward. So we're gonna lay this down here and slide it into the little slot. You may have to wiggle it a little bit, push it all the way until it hits, and it can spin like this up against the piston housing here. And then we're going to have to push that plunger in, and we are going to rotate this backwards 180 degrees until it locks in place, and now we only are able to manually turn it to the 2 positions, which would be the suppressed and unsuppressed position. So now we have our barrel reattached to the upper receiver, and we have our piston reinserted into the upper receiver assembly. So now that this is complete, this portion of the upper receiver is cleaned. I did the best I could around here where the piston is, especially if you're shooting this thing suppressed, you're going to get a little bit of stuff spattering out, so just get that cleaned up. So we can go ahead and just slide this right back on, line everything up, make sure that this portion here on this side and on this side slide into the rails that are there, and this is going to go all the way back. There should not be any gaps here. This should be flush, so you may have to stand it up and kind of whack it a little bit. Something that's not going to damage your weapon. When we reassemble the weapon, this hole can go all the way through for that takedown pin. All right, so now we're going to reassemble our bolt. We're going to go backwards the way we took it apart. So we have our extractor here. Make sure that you have your spring attached to it. It didn't fall off and get lost somewhere. We're just going to place it right back in here where it goes, and then you need to find your pin that goes in there. If you are having issues and you're not able to basically hold it in place, what you can do is take the same punch that you used before, get it lined up where it needs to be, and you can feed that through, so now it's holding it for you. You can get your pin on the other side and just force the punch out using it, and it should stay lined up. And then just come back from the other side and make sure it's lined up evenly. You don't want portions of it sticking out. It should be even on both sides. So it should look a little something like that. So now we're going to go ahead and reinsert our bolt. Make sure you pay attention to which direction your extractor is facing. The bolt should be going this way, so the extractor as I'm holding it should be on my right, because you got to think it's pulling the rounds out, and that's where the ejection port is, and it's going to kick the rounds out. So slide those in. This hole right here should be facing up and visible through this section right here. And once you have a view of that, that's where this pin comes in. So this hole that's right here, this firing pin feeds through the bolt this way and is going to need to go in there. So you're going to feed it in sideways into that hole that I pointed out. And then we're going to rotate it 90 degrees so that now our firing pin can actually go all the way through and can reach and come out the front of the bolt face there to impact your rounds and cause detonation. All right, so the next part can be a little bit of a pain in the butt. Like I mentioned previously, we've got our little slot here. You've got this rounded portion with the recoil springs on it, and that's gonna slide in from this side. We then have this weird little funky shaped piece, and if you look at the way it's designed, we've got our hole here where our pin's gonna go through. There is a spring-loaded plunger piece right here on the top. That spring-loaded plunger piece is going to be pushed against by this part sticking up here, so that's how you know that goes up. So think of it like a shark fin, so that's going to be going up out of the water while you're lining up that hole on this rounded front portion here. So that's facing towards the front of the bolt. Mine has an S on it. Some of them may have a G for Geisele, so as long as that letter is in the correct orientation, you'll know you have it facing the right direction. So because the head of my little pin that retains this is on this side, I'm gonna have to go down from here, so I'm gonna flip it over. It's still facing the same way. So once all this is locked in and flat, all we have to do is push this forward. You may have to lift this recoil spring piece up out of the way. You're gonna feed it in there. I'll use my punch again to catch it so that that's all the way through, but then this is ultimately what it should look like. So that plunger again pushes against this, and you've got that little tail down inside of there that can swing upward. So if I come up from the other side, I can do what I did earlier with the other pin, and I've got my pin here that's got the head on it, and I'm gonna go down with it to retain that little funky shaped piece there. And we're going to back our punch out as we push it in, make sure that it fits down flush inside of there. You'll see it on the other side, and now our bolt assembly is back together. We're going to push the firing pin in and then push that firing pin retaining pin in there, the one that was captured that did not fall out, and we did not lose it. So our bolt is now properly reassembled. This should function fine. All right, so much like a standard AR-15, this charging handle is flat. It does not have the little hollowed out portion. It is specific to the MCX, MPX series of weapons, but it's gonna go in the same. So we're gonna insert it part of the way, and then there's that little notched area that, like I mentioned previously, that those notches go into, so slide it until you hit that. And then put it all the way till it meets the top of the upper receiver, but we got to leave it sticking out just a little bit so we can make room for our bolt to go in behind it. All right, so we've got our gap there. Remember, this is the portion that the piston pushes against, so that needs to go forward, and the part where these two little spring pieces meet in the back here is going to be the rear of the firearm. So make sure that your bolt is pulled all the way forward down here. We're going to put this up against our charging handle, and we're going to slide it in. May have to wiggle it just a little bit to get it to go just right, and then it should all go forward together as one assembly. Your charging handle should lock in. Now you are going to have this portion of the springs are going to want to stick out just a little bit, but that's acceptable. Once we clamp the two pieces together, you'll kind of rock it in place so that it shoves that inside the weapon there. So now we're on to the last step. Just make sure prior to attempting reassembly of the upper and lower receiver that your takedown pins are pulled all the way to the side where they are captured, so they're not interfering with you inserting the portions of the upper receiver where they meet. Like I said, you may have to rock this in place just a little bit, so come from the back forward, because you have that, again, you can see this gap here, and it is kind of spring-loaded a little bit. Takedown ports together. You can push either one of these that you want first. I did the front first. Rock this up into place, and then push the rear pin down. And then we just do a function check to make sure we got everything working right. So we'll just pull our charging handle all the way to the rear and let it go. A couple times. Try and pull your trigger. Nothing happens. Switch to fire. Fires, we're going to cycle it. Put it back on safe, and we've successfully reassembled the weapons. So hopefully you found this video helpful in your endeavors for disassembling your Sig MCX for whatever purpose you are disassembling it for. Please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, whatever you feel the need to do. As always, I am open to constructive criticism or feedback. If there's anything I can do to make my videos better for you, please feel free to let me know. So with that, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.